We are halfway through winter, but do you feel that you were prepared for it as a landlord? That's what we're going to be talking about today on this episode of the Lady Landlords Podcast. We want to make sure if there was anything else that maybe you could have been doing to prepare yourself a little bit more from a winter maintenance situation within your rental properties. So we actually went over to our Lady Landlords Facebook community and asked some of our members what have they really been struggling with this winter. Now, listen, we all have to make sure that we have our properties prepared, and honestly, keeping your properties in good condition will make your job as a landlord so much easier when you don't have either complaints for tenants or don't have to deal with when things break, and it just gives you peace of mind. So it's incredibly important to always make sure that your properties are in good condition. But with winter, there are a lot of things that can pop up that are just going to be completely different than kind of your regular maintenance that we need to be able to think about. So apparently, I think our groundhog just saw his shadow. I think that means that he is staying in and hibernating a few more months. So we have to really be prepared. We could still have quite a bit of cold weather ahead of us. And that's why I think it's going to be really important for us to make sure we talk about some of these topics. To be honest, a lot of times when I'm doing either interviews for podcasts or being asked about my portfolio, one of the questions that I tend to get is like, oh, what is one thing that you would have changed? And to be honest, sometimes the one thing that I would have changed would have been that I would have picked a property that was not anywhere near snow. As many of our Lady Landlords regulars listeners do know, I have most of my rental properties in New York State, right outside of New York City. And then I also own some properties in the Dominican Republic. Now, that is a whole different set of issues, especially when you're close to the beach, things dealing with oxidizing that you might need to do some repairs on. But winter is a big issue for many of us with rental properties in the United States. And that's something that I want to make sure that we can talk through some of those issues today. So I have a list of questions that our lady landlords wrote in, and I'm going to go through some of them and see what we can be able to talk about and get you ladies help for. So our first question comes in from Tara. She's in northern Minnesota, so talk about a place that's incredibly cold this time of year, saying, can we just talk about frozen pipes for a second? She said that in her quadplex that they've dealt with frozen pipes from one unit particular. And he's admitted multiple times that he goes without running water for days and is saying what is the responsibility to charge him possibly for those pipes, and then also to deal with just the negligence of him really not being able to keep up with that. So one of the things that's going to be interesting about this is we have to remember that as landlords, really that the issues with inside the apartment, with any of the structures, the mechanicals, all those things, that really is a landlord responsibility. Okay. So my problem, Tara, is by trying to enforce that he needs to be able to run water, which to be honest, I'm starting to question, like, how is he going days without running water? Right. So for example, like I'm thinking showers, washing dishes, washing your hands, all of those different types of things. So sounds a little odd there, but if he's really not doing that, that's also his choice. His role as that tenant is not to do that maintenance, to check water, to be running it every couple of days so that it doesn't freeze, unfortunately. Also, normally during our winter months, we have a couple of holidays, people go away, they want to take vacations this time, they go visit family. So unfortunately, I really don't think it would be fair to be charging the tenant for him not running the water when really there should be something else going on with those pipes if they keep freezing with that. This is something that I would highly recommend getting a plumber out there and seeing what point of this is happening where the freezing is actually going on. That's interesting that it's specifically one of the units. This happened to me in one of my properties in New York. In that property, it actually had an addition on the first floor. So we didn't have this problem on the second floor units. It was a duplex. But on the first floor units, where that addition was actually where the kitchen was added. So the pipes that were running into the kitchen were actually kind of like exterior, and it created a lot of problems, and we were having the same problem with those pipes actually freezing. So, but that was something that I couldn't explain to the tenants, and it wasn't fair for me to charge them if they, for example, went home for the holidays and weren't able to run pipes for a couple of days. So from an idea of really taking care of the maintenance for the house itself, I would encourage you to see what you could do with those pipes. One of the best inventions is that there is actually heating tape that you can use on a lot of these pipes. So on one of my other properties, we realized that in the basement, there was a section that just was not as insulated as well. So, and it was a crawl space. It was a very difficult space to really kind of be in. And we were able to at least get in there to add some insulation in there. But once again, just from the size and the shape of it, that was already a bit of a struggle. But we were actually able to add these electric heat tape strips right onto the pipe and then have those plugged in. That's something that we don't need to run the full year through. So it's not that it costs us a lot. It's not that it takes up a lot of electricity. But when we turn on the heat on and off, once again, that is something in the state of New York that we are required to do at a certain time points throughout the year. That is the right time for us to be able then to also turn on that heated tape strips. That's something, once again, very low watt, does not take a lot of power, so not an expensive thing. And trust me, it is so much cheaper than having to call a plumber out or deal with burst pipes and have to deal with that situation when they freeze. So I would recommend that. But to be honest, anything within that side, that's not going to be a tenant responsibility. That's on us as landlords. I understand, with him not running that water, yes, I understand where then that negligence could be like on his part, but it's really not his responsibility to make sure that the pipes aren't freezing. That is more of an issue with the house, which is why, unfortunately, that's something that I would recommend you get that plumber out there and see what is happening on in that situation. Next up, we have a similar question from Melissa. Melissa, who's in New York, just like me, is saying, how do you winterize unoccupied properties? Who is the person that's supposed to be paying for this? How much do you pay? Who is the right person to call? All those different questions. This is a great question to ask, not just if you're somebody that you have that vacancy and you feel that you're going to have that occupancy for quite a bit of time, you want to start thinking about it. Just kind of like what I was saying to Tara, if your tenant's away, they can't run those pipes. That's going to be the same thing if your property is actually vacant, right? There's going to be nobody there to run those pipes. So that's why creating really a longer term solution, Tara, is that better idea. But for Melissa, if you have those unoccupied properties, there are a couple different maintenance things that you want to be able to do for that. So when it comes down to who's paying for this, once again, that is also going to be on you. This is a landlord responsibility, and that also is something that's going to be that cost of business. If you have properties in a place where there are freezing temperatures and you know that during the winter, then you want to make sure that you can also factor in any of these extra costs that you're going to have to deal with when we don't have tenants necessarily in place. So start thinking of those things ahead of time. And once again, always factor that into your deal analysis. Okay. With then how to get that winterizing done. This is something that usually you would want to call a plumber. You'd want to reach out to your handyman, your HVAC technician. Any of those different types of people would really be able to do this. But you need to also think about what tasks actually need to be done for your specific situation. For example, if you have a property that you are planning on doing a rehab for, but you're not going to start that rehab now until spring when the ground thaws and you can actually get in there and those types of things, that's going to take a much stronger winterization process than if you're just saying, hey, tenant moved out, and I know in my area it takes 2 to 3 months to be able to rent that place. So now you know it's going to be sitting there for a few months. That's really going to be kind of the difference that you're looking at in that situation. So a handyman might be perfectly fine to fulfill some of the needs if you're just looking at a shorter period of time. That's something that you just maybe want your handyman to come in to add some extra insulation in some certain places, to make sure that your gutters are clean. So that way, if there's any snow, that those can really get out once that starts melting, get through those downspouts. Make sure to seal up any types of gaps. Make sure that there's no animals, any bugs, anything like that can really kind of come into that property. Those things are going to be really important to be able to do, even if that property is just sitting for a short period of time. But if then you're going to be looking at having a property, once again, that's going to be empty for months throughout the entire winter, this is really where you want to make sure that you are contacting a plumber for those heavier winterization processes. This would be making sure, once again, that your water heater is going to be in good condition, that your pipes are not going to have any freezing, any of those types of ideas. That might be something that for winterizing, you want to make sure that your water heater is drained, right? Once again, that won't necessarily be used. So you also don't want any other water kind of in your pipes, in any other spaces, then because in that way you might end up freezing. There might be things that are cracking. There might be things that break, and then you're going to have a problem on your hands when the weather warms up again, and now you're going to end up having water anywhere. So The cost of that, though, is really going to determine on what items you're having done. Once again, if you're doing just some simple items with a handyman versus if you need a plumber to come out and are doing some of those bigger ticket items, that's really going to make a difference in cost. It's also going to make a difference based on your location. I know you said you were in New York, Melissa, but since I'm not quite sure where, I will say that there is quite a big price difference between if you're doing something in New York City in Manhattan versus if you're looking up in Buffalo or much farther north. Prices are just going to be really different there. It also depends on the property. Are we talking a quadplex with 4 units? How big are these units? Are you talking a large single family home? How many bathrooms are there going to be? All of those different questions, Melissa, are going to factor into the price. You'd probably looking at, I don't know, let's just do ballpark here, $500 to $1,500 for maybe some handyman work. And then it could cost you a couple grand if you're saying, hey, this is a larger property in a higher cost of living area and it's going to need to be sealed up for months. So you are going to have a plumber come in and do some of that work. That is really something that you'd want to calculate in a few $1,000s. But what I would love, Melissa, is if you can go back to your question when you posted this in the Lady Landlords Facebook group, and give me a little more context. Why are we winterizing this? I think we need to understand the outcome of what we're looking to get from certain things so that way we can make better decisions. So once again, I'm not quite sure when you're saying winterizing, if we're just saying how can we kind of protect it for a few weeks, or I just need to set it and forget it because I'm not doing anything with this property for a few months. Okay. So that's the space that I would want to be there. Next question we have was written into us by Amanda. Amanda's saying that she has an upstairs unit that has frozen pipes. They've been working on it for almost 12 hours and have no luck in getting that water to run again. It's been -20 for days, and she said that it's not expected to get up even above freezing until the next week. She's asking how can they even try to resolve this problem, and what are they able to tell even the tenant like at that point in time? This is something that she's saying she's just never experienced this before and is stuck and frustrated and all of those different things. So Amanda, I totally get that. I have been there. The first couple properties that my husband and I brought, always something went wrong with pipes and the heating whenever we got to winter. It did not matter. We always closed during like summer months, maybe even fall. But what's interesting is that it was always once we turned on the heat, now a few months later after owning the properties, that was always when a problem popped up. Everything always worked out during the inspection, during the walkthrough closing. But without fail, all of a sudden we ended up having problems once we got to colder months. So within this, Amanda, for the first part of your problem of what can you do with this situation, I would love to know if you were actually working with a plumber or you're saying we have been working on it for days. So I'm curious on if this is something that you've been trying to work through. Otherwise, you're going to need to get somebody out there if this is something that you've never experienced before that really understands how to handle that to get that water running. What's going to be important is actually to kind of see where that pipe is running from so you can identify what part it actually gets frozen at. For example, one of my properties, probably about 3 years now, maybe 2 years ago, 2 winters ago, 3 winters ago, somewhere in there, it froze. Now, all of a sudden, I wasn't actually getting the heat up into our units, which was now the bigger struggle there. Absolutely freezing. Same thing, was not going to warm up for days. So what we were able to do, just from the experience we'd had now of being landlords for a couple of years, we were able to kind of track where that pipe went, and we were able to figure out where it actually got frozen. We were able to identify kind of where all of a sudden it was getting stuck because there was actually a point where that pipe went between 2 rooms. One of it was actually an exterior crawl space, and then the next was the interior mechanical room space. And it was getting frozen there. So what I was actually able to do, and I do have a picture of this. It's on my Instagram if anybody ever checks that out. But on my Instagram, I posted all about this because what was interesting in that space was we were able to take a hair dryer, tie it, and attach it to those pipes and just have that just blow on that space where the pipe was actually frozen. And very fortunately, we were able to get that pipe running again. Moving water itself, once you can get that pipe moving back again, and then you can get that water heated back up for what our situation was with that heat in that situation. I'm not quite sure. You said frozen pipes, but I'm not quite sure what types of frozen pipes you're talking about here. But for our pipes, once we were able to get the water moving again and get it heated back up, it most likely wasn't going to end up freezing again unless temperature drops back again. You're saying -20. Yeah, in that situation, we might have had problems again. But once the water is actually running, moving, and then got a little bit heated up, then we knew that we were not going to end up back in that problem. But the way to solve that was really understanding where the freeze was actually happening, where that problem was actually taking place. And then same thing, we were able to use some of the strategies that I mentioned for Melissa and then Tara with using some of those heated electric strips. And that was really able to make sure that we didn't have to break out that hair dryer again. With that, with the tenants, I mean, once again, also when you have tenants in that property, this is also something that you might need to be able to call in professionals there because these are things that the tenants are looking for. And that's what they're paying for, is to be able to have the use of this, of their home safely, warmly, everything in that sense. Like I said, I'm not quite sure what pipes are freezing in your situation. I don't know if it's something to deal with heat. I don't know if it's something to deal with just running water. So feel free to update your post, Amanda, and let me know what you're experiencing there. But I would make sure to let the tenants know the steps that you are taking. And like I said, I would recommend, especially in your situation, to be able to get a plumber out there and identify this problem so that way it won't be this way moving forward. This is something that, from a tenant's perspective, they should not expect this to be a recurring issue every single year. So it's going to be very important to make sure that you're showing the tenants what's going on and that you are taking the right steps to be able to fix the solution as easy as possible. If it is something that is broken, if it is something that now, once again, they're not having access to heat, to running water for days, this is also why, ladies, it is so important to make sure that you have a renter's insurance. Your tenants, this is something that you should be requiring of tenants at that point in time. If now their home is uninhabitable for a certain period of time, i.e., no heat, no running water, the topics we're talking about here, Amanda, then this is something that they would be able to reach out also to their renter's insurance to help provide them a place to stay during this time, to also replace, once again, any food items that they have, any other difficulties that they're having. That's the whole point of renter's insurance. We do have an episode all about renter's insurance here on the Lady Landlords Podcast. So if you've not heard that, I do recommend you go back, you take a listen to that. And in that situation, it's really important that you do enforce that and make sure that your tenants do have renter's insurance for situations just like this, Amanda. But once again, I think it sounds, Amanda, it's time to be able to call in some professionals. The next question we have for winterization is from Ashley. Ashley is saying that it has been in the negatives where she lives for quite a few days now. She has a boiler heat in their unit, and it's been working really well, she said. But over the past few days, she's saying that the tenants are complaining that they're still cold. They're complaining that they feel like they have to use electric heaters, and they feel like that's unfair if heat is actually included in the rent, right? The boilers are now struggling because of these negative temps. They're claiming that their temperatures are under 60 degrees in their apartments, but one of the buildings actually has an independent control and they have it set at 80 degrees, okay? Otherwise, the central control is at 70. All right, so Ashley, the first place I want you to start, and it's missing in your post, but the first place I want you to start is understanding what your local laws are, okay? States are really going to set what those regulations are. So if you're including heat, it's incredibly important to understand not only the date, the time of year that you actually do need to be able to turn on that heat. You also have to provide heat if the temperatures drop below a certain amount. So you want to also make sure that you understand what that threshold is there. And then also where the heats have to be, okay? These are things, for example, in New York State, when heat has to be turned on between, I think it's October and May, heat during the day needs to be at 68 degrees and it can be lowered to 62 later in the evenings. And they actually have hours to when that can be set. So I would try, once again, if there's a problem with the tenants that are actually having their heat on 80 but still not there, I think it's really important to understand what the temperature actually is. I hear you saying that they're claiming their temps are under 60, but how are they determining that, right? With that, I understand that your boilers are struggling. That might be then a first case of really making sure that you're getting your boilers regularly serviced. I think it's going to be important to make sure that they're running the most efficiently, because in that way, you're saying that it's really been a few days that the heat has been in the negatives. We want to make sure that these are boilers then that can support the space and that they are in good condition to make sure that they are running properly and can actually meet the requirements of your local laws. Once we know then that the boilers are running at their best capacity, then we need to find a way to see if there's actually a problem here. So if the tenants are claiming the temperatures are under 60, one of the things that we have in all of our units is we have some type of, most of our units, actually, let me take a step back. Most of our units are multifamilies. And since they're multifamilies, a lot of them only have that one heater and they're all connected. So we actually do have in most of our properties, we have multiple units that are being shared that we then need to control the heat on, as we're the ones responsible for the bill for that. So I always tell people this is why if you do control the utilities, make sure that you are able to put things in place, such as using a Nest. I always tell people the stories that back when I was in college, I was always known for having luau parties throughout the winter because my heat was included in the price, but I got to control it. So it was like 85 at all times in my apartment back when I was in college. And if you want to come to a luau party, you threw on your bikini, you came over to my apartment, and that's what we were doing just because I could. And my landlord probably absolutely hated me, but there was nothing that they could do at that point in time. So make sure that if you have that, you can control that. But what I like about using something like a Nest is that you actually have the thermostat on there. So it's very easy for you to then be able to control from your phone from anywhere you are in the world to know how hot that apartment actually is. Okay. That's something that you do need a plumber, an HVAC person to be able to set up that to really make sure that it is doing an accurate reading. Right now, I don't know if we have accurate readings of what's going on, Ashley. Also, is it different rooms that are different temperatures? Is there a specific space that they're complaining about? This might be something you also want to look into. Why? Are there cracks within windows? Is there space under doors that now are bringing in where some rooms are cooler compared to necessarily where your controls are, which is why it's looking like one reading to you, but yet a different reading to them. Also, kind of being able to check up on some of these situations, if you are local, is also going to be helpful and important. I had a tenant years ago. He was a very interesting guy. I've done other episodes talking about just nightmare tenants and what that has looked like. So feel free to listen to some of those episodes here on the Lady Landlords podcast. But one of the tenants I had did a very similar thing. He was saying that the temperature was too cold in the apartment, that he needed to be able to turn it up. We explained to him that the heat was already set, that we met all of the local conditions that we needed to. We were actually above even the temperatures that we were required to by the state of New York. We went over since he kept complaining that it wasn't there. And I'll never forget when he opened his door to his apartment with no shoes on, no socks on, no shirt on, and had his window open, right? So that's also a spot where if you're complaining you're cold, but you don't have socks on and you have your windows open, well, we might have to have a little conversation about that. So it is something that, to be honest, Ashley, I would say you kind of need to dig into this. Let's figure out what's going on with the boilers first and why they're struggling so much in these temperatures. Two, then let's really kind of get clarity on what the temperatures in these apartments are actually doing and if there's any other things that we could do just from best practices to make sure that your tenants can get the heat that they need. Also, I'm curious to see, you said that the heat is included. So I would also kind of consider moving to a system where no matter where you are, that you can also be able to see and have a better understanding of not just what the heat's set to, but also what the actual temperature in your units is. So I think those things would be able to help here. Then last question we have, this one is always a very interesting question. Snow removal. Sarah is saying that in one of her properties that she's trying to figure out who is supposed to be responsible for tenant removal. All right. So Sarah, the most important thing, and I'm not quite sure if this is a property that you inherited, but really you need to go back to your lease. Who is responsible per the lease to be able to clean that? I think it makes a very big difference when it comes to snow removal based on the type of property you're talking about. Okay. So personally, for I think almost all of my properties, we as the landlords handle that snow removal. The reason for that is because they're multifamilies. Within multifamilies, there is no way, if you've ever lived in a duplex or a larger apartment building, and once again, I lived in the city for many, many years throughout Manhattan and the Bronx. And within that, I guarantee you, there was no way, even with hundreds of people in a building, that anybody was going to go out and be like, you know what? I'm going to be the one to go clean off everybody's cars and the parking lot and clean off that common stairwell and the common walkway over to the parking lot and your sidewalks. No, That is a very, very difficult thing to do. And honestly, you also don't want to deal with that being a tenant's responsibility. I know a lot of people are always like, oh, just find a tenant, lower their rent a little bit, or give them some money so that way they can manage the property. Remember, you are now turning that tenant into an employee of yours. That is something to absolutely think about. Now, if they slip and fall, if they are a professional snow remover, if they are just a guy with a shovel, when you have somebody doing work on your property, that now is being an employee rather than being an actual tenant of that property. So I really encourage you that if you as a landlord have the responsibility for snow removal, for landscaping in general, that you hire outside parties, okay? Tenants should not be doing work, okay? Then otherwise, if you're looking at single family, that to me makes a little bit more sense. If you have a single family property and you're renting that out, then the tenants, the people that are renting the unit, whatever that unit may be, then should be really responsible for that house. So, Sarah, it really kind of comes back to what is the actual setup of where you have. That also might be something that you want to just decide, especially if your city has any regulations on this. I know where I live, a lot of our areas, you have to clean public sidewalks by certain periods of time, and every house is responsible for that different space. If that is the case, either then once again, you as a landlord want to be able to hire out and pass that cost on to your tenants. But if you're going to then make sure that the tenants are doing that, you want to make sure that they understand what those ordinances are of when they have to have the sidewalks cleaned. And then also make sure that they understand that any tickets that you as a landlord receive will then have to be paid by them. Because if they didn't clean the sidewalks, if that's their responsibility, you as a landlord should not be responsible for that ticket, but that is something that your tenant should be. So when it comes to snow removal, Sarah, let me know what the actual setup is of your property. Are we talking a multifamily here or single family here? Also, if it's a duplex and they're side by side and you have two different front doors and they go to two separate driveways, you might be able to be in a situation where you can say then each of the sets of tenants are taking responsibility then for their own side of the property. But most of my properties, we're talking shared driveways, shared walkways, all of those things. And once again, hiring a tenant can be a very, very big liability. And as a landlord, those are things that we want to be able to avoid. So if you've not, make sure to go back if you have not and go listen to our episode all about the insurances that you do need to be a landlord. Elena Jesse was the episode, so you can search for that wherever you listen to podcasts and make sure then you can get ready to go with your property, because we want to make sure that we are making money in this business and not having this business cost us in lawsuits, fines, and also injured tenants. All right. So hope this helped answer your question about winter maintenance issues on your rental properties. Thank you all again for joining me on this week's episode of the Lady Landlords Podcast. Please do make sure to hit that subscribe button so you do not miss the next episode. We release new episodes of the Lady Landlords Podcast every single Tuesday. And also, if you enjoyed today's episode, please do make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Leaving us a 5-star review helps other women like yourself be able to find our podcast and get the support that they need from Lady Landlords. Thank you so much. I will see you all back in the Lady Landlords Facebook community.
Thank you for listening to the Lady Landlords Podcast. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate investing journey, visit lady-landlords.com to book a 15-minute orientation call with me and see if you're ready to join our mentorship program. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and join our Facebook group for exclusive real estate investing tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a Lady Landlord today.